All right, Going the Distance, Episode 1. I'm your host, of course, Jacob Koopman, and this is going to be going up on the Gloves Up YouTube channel. This is a podcast where I review some of the biggest combat sports stories of the week. Of course, for this week and the inaugural episode, we do have to talk about UFC 283. I assume that this podcast will be first, just because I want to get this out before UFC 283. I want to give some picks, so if you want to see me be horrendously wrong or correct, it'll have to be before the fights and not after the fights, so I don't look like a complete idiot, you know? But let's hop into it first. We got to talk about this UFC 283 main card. We got Paul Craig, Johnny Walker, Lauren Murphy, Jessica Andrade, Neil Magny, Gilbert Burns, Deiveson, Figueiredo, Brandon Moreno for the Quadrilogy, the first Quadrilogy in UFC history. And then for the main event, Glover Teixeira, Jamahal, which I kind of thought was a little bit of a sleeper pick for a really, really good fight. I know that currently Jamahal is the betting favorite, but you can never count out Glover Teixeira. So I want to give my thoughts, just my general predictions, my breakdown of this main card, maybe just the fights that I want to talk about, perhaps the top three. But I think Paul Craig and Johnny Walker is going to be a really good one. I know Johnny Walker, his last time out there, really razzled and dazzled. And then, of course, then had that hilarious video with John Kavanagh where they kicked him. I think they kicked him out of the arena because he couldn't find his clothes soon enough. There must have been some sort of a time restriction due to, I don't know, pandemic laws or something along those lines, restrictions. And the guy was just out on the street in his fight uniform, gloves still on and everything. So a hilarious video, but Paul Craig, both of those guys, man, those guys are savages. So that's going to be a really fun fight. I think that if Johnny Walker wants to keep his win streak alive and he wants to right his wrongs, he needs to get through a guy in Paul Craig that's pretty good everywhere. He's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu specialist, one of the most talented guys on the ground in that division, a scary dude, a dude with a lot of power. They don't call him the Bear Jew for nothing. Just also a very handsome fellow. I've noticed that Paul Craig is, I was watching the UFC embedded earlier today. I was like, wow, this guy is actually really, really good looking, right? But point is, listen, he can fight in the cage. So I don't want to take anything away from him there. That's going to be a tough test for Walker. Honestly, when I look at Walker, I look at a guy who is very flashy. But when you get down to the nitty-gritty details of who he is as a fighter, and I'm going to come off as a hater here, unfortunately, I don't think he has enough to take it to that next level. Paul Craig, he's much more of a tough guy. Now, it's left to be seen whether or not these guys can both get to the higher level, to that next level of championship contention. But point is, both of these guys' journeys now have come together, and they need to duke it out to see who will overcome this impasse and get up to the higher rankings in this division. I think it's going to be a fun fight, but I do see Paul Craig getting it done via probably submission. I could see that be, or you know what, also decision. Johnny Walker, never in a boring fight, but when he doesn't finish guys, you see him start to kind of sputter over the course of a fight. So I think the more this fight goes the distance, the more the technicality and the grit of Paul Craig will probably come through and serve to his advantage. So, if this goes the distance, I've got Paul Craig. Of course, I'm not discounting Johnny Walker getting him out of there with a finish. I think that could also be an eventuality, but I don't know, something about my MMA brain tells me that Paul Craig has got this one. Talk about Gilbert Burns and Neil Magny. This is going to be a fun one, man. All right. We know that Magny likes to stick on the outside, very good at sticking and moving, very technical both on the ground, standing up. Gilbert Burns, just one of the most savage guys in that division, power in spades, really good footwork to set things up. I rewatched the Chimaev fight, and Chimaev's length, I think it could serve to show us a lot about Gilbert Burns coming into this one. And I noticed Chimaev, because he's a gigantic guy for welterweight, and you see that in that he missed weight by like 8 pounds that last time. But point is, he was also significantly longer and bigger than Burns. And Burns had a little bit of trouble at first getting inside on him, right? Getting into boxing range, in the pocket. And then as the fight progressed, Burns was able to kind of make it more of a violent, slugfest, scrappy type of affair. And I think that's what he needs to do again this fight. Now, Magny is super duper technical. He's good at fighting off the back foot. I think this favors Burns, man. I think Burns has had more experience with better guys. I don't want to say more experience in general, because I know Neil Magny has perhaps, I think it might be, I'll put it up on the screen, the record. So if I'm incorrect here, then post-Coop correct me, but I think it might be the most fights or the most finishes at welterweight. So he's been in there with a bunch of guys, but if you think about the guys that, I mean, Usman has been in there with Burns, or should I say Burns has been in there with Usman. He's been in there with Dan Hooker. Now he's been in there with Jamahal. I mean, he'll fight anyone, right? And so he's had this wealth of experience with really dangerous guys. Is Neil Magny on that level? I don't think so. So I think in terms of experience, Burns should have this, and stylistically, you think about when Burns takes to the ground, you got to give him the advantage there. Maybe not in the wrestling department, but certainly in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu department. And then standing up, I think where this fight would be decided is if Neil Magny can keep it at range, if he can stay behind his jab, look for counter opportunities, because when he gets the fight where he wants it, which is kind of more of a slow-paced type of dice you up top with the hands type of affair, not the type of fight, notably, that Burns likes to fight, I think he'll probably be a lot more comfortable. And what I noticed from watching some tape on Magny is that when he gets comfortable, it's usually not a fun time for the guys he's in there with. I think there's going to be this period early on in the fight where we see Burns having to kind of adjust or maybe get a little bit more comfortable with getting inside on Magny. But if he's able to get inside and Magny's not able to keep him back and keep this fight at range, I got Burns all day. Then, of course, you got Jessica Andrade versus Lauren Murphy. Jessica has had experience at the top of the division, has fought some really tough people. I mean, what she did to Rose Namajunas is still gives me shudders to this day. Like, I watched that that replay back, and man, the way she had her just ragdolled was scary to watch. And I do think with that home field advantage of being in Brazil, having her nation's fans behind her, it was kind of touching, not to get too off topic, but I did see, it was very touching to see all the Brazilian fighters supporting each other. You have Charles Oliveira in Deiveson Figueiredo's corner, not physically in his corner, but, you know, over the course of this training camp, whispering sweet nothings into his ears and kind of just giving him support. I thought that was really nice. I just think that Lauren Murphy has kind of been this athlete where she has been competitive, but at this point, I don't even want to say she's a gatekeeper. I think she's more so just kind of a notable name for the hype that she used to carry with herself. I never want to say a fighter is over the hill, because with the fighting spirit, of course, brought to you by Modelo. No, with the fighting spirit that these people possess, I don't think that you could be over the hill mentally, but perhaps physically, there's something to be said for the amount of wars that she's been through. Like, I'm going to look it up right now. Hold on. I mean, look, you got some good wins here. I mean, Miesha Tate, she had a win over in 2022. She's faced some really tough competition, Valentina Shevchenko, but she got finished there. Joanne Wood, she finished. I mean, it's kind of a mixed bag, right? Like, she beat Roxanne Modafferi. I mean, besides that, though, I don't know. I think she's kind of a middle-of-the-road type of fighter, and I think once she gets to that next level, which, I mean, we know that Andrade is championship level because she's held the championship before, I think she's going to hit a wall, and I honestly don't think that she is able to compete at that next level. So I got to give that one to Andrade. Then we've got the quadrilogy here, Deiveson Figueiredo versus Moreno 4. That's going to be nuts. That's going to be ridiculous. I don't even know necessarily if we're going to be able to get to the other fight sports news. Maybe we'll cover it on a different episode of the podcast, but perhaps this will just be enough here between the notes that we have, just basically on talking about this UFC 283 card, man. I'm excited. This is probably my fight of the night. My early prediction for fight of the night. I got to get a little bit more well-versed with the prelims, but just, you could maybe make a case for Gilbert Burns, but just looking at these 5 fights right now, if I was a betting man, right, which I'm not, because every time I bet on a fight, it always goes horribly wrong. Even if the fight is currently underway and one fighter is winning, every time I put a bet in, it figures out a way to just, like, the universe karmically just figures out a way to fuck my betting line all the way up. But if I was a betting man, I would probably put money down on Brandon Moreno and Deiveson Figueiredo being that fight of the night. Of course, the first quadrilogy in UFC history, and a series that we just talked about the universe now, a series that it seems like was perfectly put together, perfectly spliced together. Where the first fight, which Figueiredo would have won if it wasn't for that low groin strike, you have the second fight that I mean, dude, Brandon Moreno came out and absolutely dogged Figueiredo. And then the third fight, which was close, but I personally thought Figueiredo took that one. And now you have this fourth fight, right? So it seems like everything is perfectly set up for this fourth and final meeting between these two guys for all the marbles. It's one of those ones where you don't even really have to market it. And I was working on this theory earlier today. I was thinking about it as I got my coffee. You could even make the argument for some, I don't know, trilogies and second fights that the hype speaks for itself. The UFC likes to hype up their fights, and then they like to kind of, there's like a promotional type of beast. There's a promotional machine behind it. With these fights, you don't really need this, right? Like nobody was going to say, oh, well, I wasn't originally going to watch the fourth fight between Deiveson Figueiredo and Brandon Moreno, but because there's this question that has to be answered there, or there's this kind of X factor there, I might tune in. No, I mean, every time these guys step in there, it doesn't matter. It's always going to be a competitive fight. Now, that second fight, Moreno smoked him. But you think about the two fights that sandwiched that fight together, man. Oh, just so competitive, so violent. And we as fans are always, I feel like, expecting and are almost, it's like a cosmic guarantee that when these guys step in there, it's going to be an absolute war. As for the predictions, I mean, I've heard rumors that Figueiredo didn't have a good weight cut for this one coming in. Moreno seems to have had a really good camp. It's really anyone's ball game. I like Dan Hardy's breakdown. I watched him on the War Room. He said that this fight, and I do agree with him, is contingent upon who wants to bring in that kind of X factor into it. Right, so he made a good point. In the third fight, it was those leg kicks from Figueiredo, which he really, really used well, especially in that first round. In the first fight, I mean, the X factor was, of course, that low groin strike. And in the second fight, it was the aggression, the pace that was set early by Moreno that really won him that fight, because Figueiredo was a little bit more measured in that second one, and then is finally able to get him out of there with a choke in round number 3. So this fight, we have to see what each guy is going to bring in. I really agree with Dan Hardy when he says that. As if it wasn't enough that it's guaranteed fireworks every time they step in there, now we have to ask that question of like, who's going to utilize a new and unseen angle or a technique, or come in there with a different type of mentality. I mean, there's a lot of different moving pieces that go deeper than the surface as to why this could be an entertaining fight. So I really don't feel comfortable giving a prediction, because it really could go either way. And perhaps maybe that's me being too scared to get called an MMA, an amateur guy that doesn't really do his research. But I mean, if you want to talk about who I'm pulling for, it's certainly Moreno. I don't mind Figueiredo as a champion, but I feel like Moreno's hard not to root for, man. And then finally, we've got the Glover Teixeira versus Jamahal Hill fight for the main event. Jamahal Hill, an absolute power puncher, a dude that came out of the Dana White Contender Series, against Glover Teixeira, a guy that has been tested, has done really what nobody else has done at his old age, becoming the oldest UFC champion in the world and putting on a masterclass against Jan Blachowicz, man. I mean, and then going to war with Yuri. I mean, I know that a lot of people see that fight as going to Yuri, and of course Yuri won by submission, but that fight was back and forth. And to be that competitive with a young and hungry champion in Yuri, for Glover, I mean, I can't factor him out of this fight. Again, Jamahal Hill's the betting favorite coming into this because of his power, and I imagine because of the advantage he has in the stand-up department. But Glover, I think one thing that he does really well is he keeps it simple. And that's one thing I really enjoy about watching him fight, is his ability to make simple techniques and simple transitions and junctures look amazing. Right, and sticking to what works for him. Obviously, on the ground, this goes to Glover Teixeira with his wealth of experience in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He helped out the champ, Alex Pereira, for his fight, which I don't know. I mean, you see the fight, some of the way he looked in terms of the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu department in his fight with Izzy. I mean, it makes you wonder if he really trained any Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at all leading up to that fight. But point is, Teixeira is certified on the ground and obviously has the advantage. So this one to me is who can enact their game plan better. I was watching Jamahal Hill's team. They had an interview, I think, for Embedded, and they said that they were fairly confident just because they know that Glover is pretty one-dimensional and that he's going to be looking to take this to the ground. Hill's team is confident that once there's a connection there for their pupil, their star, and Glover feels his power, that Glover's going to want to take this one to the ground. But I don't think it's as simple as that. I think another great thing about Teixeira is that he can mix together his boxing and his wrestling really, really well, and his kicks. So that's going to be very, very interesting to see how Hill handles that. if you want my prediction, I got to go with the wily veteran. There's something about Teixeira where I can't go against him. And it's just because of his last fights. Like, I didn't necessarily think that Jan or Yuri were going to steamroll Glover, but I didn't expect Glover to hang in there with those two guys as well as he did. So, in good conscience, I can't pick against Teixeira. I could see maybe a submission finish for him. But if it stays up top, I think Jamahal Hill's got power to crack, and I think that would go his direction. But I'm going to put in my pick, Teixeira by submission. And you know what? I'm going to go for the Moreno and Figueiredo fight. I think we have another really competitive decision. And I might give it to Figueiredo. I think, it's interesting too with the coaching controversy with Krause and everything that's gone on, how Moreno is going to react in these types of situations and how he's going to mentally handle that and get out there and compete and train. He says he's had a really good training camp, but every guy says that before a fight. And then if they lose or they win, it's like, oh yeah, well, this, that, the third happened. So we don't really know, point is, how Moreno is going to handle this and how he's going to look coming into this one. And strictly for that, I might go, again, I want Moreno to win, but I might go Figueiredo by decision. This has been Going the Distance. I've been your host, Jacob Koopman, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.